Gentlemen, welcome to the annual NFL Executive Board meeting. Now, I heard the numbers were really good last year, but how good were they, VP of Finances?
Well, we made a record $9.5 billion in revenue last year. This was largely fueled by our ticket sales, which the average NFL team brought in $51 million in terms of revenue. The average ticket price is roughly around $80. It costs $3,100 for the average price of a Super Bowl ticket, so that's being the large source of our income. Merchandising, we made a record $2.1 billion last year, and with the additions of the new stadiums that our Director of Development will talk about, we project further increase in growth.
Excellent, excellent. Let's hear about those new stadiums.
Currently, Mr. Commissioner, we are planning projects with the San Francisco 49ers, Cleveland Browns, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. We are looking to put Wi-Fi in stadiums, add more luxury boxes to boost profits, and the projections based on new stadiums such as the Dallas Cowboys with their new stadium looks very good.
Excellent, but building new stadiums sounds kind of expensive. How about their sponsorships coming?
Yeah, we are working with a few new sponsors to hopefully cover the costs of our new stadiums. So hopefully we won't have to pay any money out of pocket for the new stadiums. We are working currently with Nike, DirecTV, and Pepsi for an estimated $1.7 billion in revenue. We're working to expand our contracts and hopefully include Levi and Disney to add an additional $5 billion.
Excellent, excellent, you guys, because we really got to get to these projected numbers of $25 billion in revenue by 2020.
Wait, guys, excuse me, aren't we a non-profit?
What are you trying to say? What was that statement for?
What are you getting at right
where do you
now?
get these interns, Goodell? I mean, really?
Well,
This is some bull.
Intern, guys, sorry, intern, go back to your office, watch the video on nonprofit.
man, I can't believe I have to watch this stupid video. It's ridiculous. Alright, here we go. Wow, this is taking a long time loading. Oh, what time is it?
Oh, who are you guys?
We're the philosophers that you've been learning about in class.
What's your name?
I'm Bowie.
I am Tom.
I'm Emmanuel.
My name is John.
Why are you guys here?
We are here to help you with your dilemma. You seem to be having difficulty with this NFL internship.
You got that right. I'm really glad that you guys came. I've been having some difficulties, like you said, with a few problems here I've been having at the office.
Well, we are here to help. So tell us, Jonathan, what are your questions about the NFL? That's
Oh.
the questions.
Well, the first one that I've been really struggling with is this bullying situation that we've been having all season. I don't know how or should the NFL get involved with the bullying at the league, and how we should go forth about this, or if we should at all.
Well, to start off, when looking at the roles, the bullying solution really has to start at the bottom with the players. They have to be accountable for themselves, and then it should move to the coaches and then the executives before the NFL even gets involved with this.
Exactly. Think of it this way, Jonathan. Human beings create a construct of reality. Our meaning and actions are developed along with others. This is called social constructivism. So the NFL has constructed a reality where bullying, big hits, violence are all glorified. This warrior mentality has come together to create a social construct that the NFL lives in, which to a rational person such as yourself, or myself, or my friend Count over there, would seem completely crazy.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to ask yourself, would you be willing to be the recipient of this bullying action in order for it to be allowed? If these NFL executives, these owners, if you're willing to have this action done upon yourself, and you're not being merely treated as tools in the institution, then yeah, it's really okay. But if you're not okay with it, then it's sufficiently immoral.
Okay.
Looking at it from a large-scale perspective, yes, the NFL should have rules that govern bullying and other such violent acts because that creates the most amount of good for the most amount of people. If you just allow bullying to go unchecked, that's creating a good scenario for the people that do the bullying, but it's really not helping anyone else, and we want to create the most good for the most amount of people.
All right, well, that just kind of begs the question, should we glorify violence then?
Well, if you look at the role the NFL has taken in this, they're leveling down their glorification of the violence. They've even put in more rules to reduce the amounts of big hits and the injuries their players take in. And they're doing a good way of executing these rules by not allowing just the lower level players to get in trouble for this. Any players will get in trouble for this, and they'll get fined and punished. The only questionable part the NFL has, though, is they're relying on other people, the referees, to adequately interpret and effectively enforce these rules.
Thinking of it from my perspective, take into account the first and second law and the idea of contracts. Humans are born with rights, and when they give up those rights voluntarily, that's called a contract. So think of it this way. A contract is given to an NFL player for a reciprocation of good. Now, this is mostly monetary, it could be fame, but think of the injuries they sustain and the violence that they come across. Is this the greatest amount of good for giving up their rights? I would argue it is not, and immoral.
Okay.
Again, I talked about my answer is the same as the humanity formulation, where you're learning how to be an owner, an executive. You have to ask yourself, are you willing to be the recipient of this violence that goes on in this NFL culture?
No, I don't think that we should be glorifying violence in football because it perpetuates a culture of violence and negative benefits for people. We should instead be focusing on the positive aspects of the game, such as fair play, sportsmanship, good, solid plays that are easily found in football and other sports for that matter. But instead, we focus on the violent aspect because that's what people want to see. Going back to the humanity formulation, you do need to be able to consciously ask yourself, would you be able to be the recipient of this action as well as the agent?
All right, well, that just kind of leads me into this. We start kids at a really young age to get involved with this, with rocket, foot leagues, etc. But what age is it appropriate to indoctrinate these kids into a football culture?
Well, whose role is it to let these kids play football at such a young age? It's not the NFL's. It's the roles of the parents. They are what allows the youth to play football. It's up to them whether or not they want their kids to be glorified in the NFL or to go into a different sport. Now, the NFL has also implemented the Heads Up program, which helps the coaches teach the children how to play with the proper fundamentals. So hopefully, by the time they reach the NFL, the big hits and other things like that are gone from the game.
Thinking of it in this way, Jonathan, again, looking back at my contracts, the NFL operates on a contract basis, giving up individual rights. But these are done by autonomous individuals with the ability to do that. When you're looking at children or younger people, they do not give up their rights voluntarily. Usually their parents will. So to expose them at that age, they're not voluntarily doing it, so it does beg the question whether it's moral or not. I would argue it is not.
I think it depends on when you'd be able to have a full knowledge and be able to fully autonomous comprehend the seriousness of the injuries that you may occur playing football. When you're an NFL veteran, you've played several years in the league, and you begin to feel the effects of the violence. You then are able to autonomously make the decision of whether or not you want to continue playing football or whether you want to call it quits. Quite frankly, we've seen quite a few NFL veterans, such as Dominic Rolla of the Detroit Lions, come out and say that despite knowing what they know now and despite going through the experiences that he's gone through, he would still do it all over again and continue playing his NFL career. However, when you're an 18 to 20-year-old kid who's who's at the peak of his physical activity, he hasn't played down in the NFL, he feels invincible, you have to ask, are they fully autonomously understanding what they would be doing to their bodies by playing NFL football? If you were turn off, maybe you might be able to make that decision. But ultimately, I believe that since the NFL makes in such a large stream of revenue, they should be able to put more efforts into educating the future generation of football players about the potential dangers that they may face, so they can fully make that autonomous decision.
Going off of the autonomy formulation as well, one must be able to know the risks associated with playing football before making that decision. And at such a young age, when a typical football player is indoctrinated, they usually are 4, 5, 6 years old when they start playing rocket football. And I believe that is too young for them to fully understand what they're doing playing football. With all the violence and risk associated with that further down the line, I think it would be a better idea if we waited a little bit longer for them to develop more of a coherent attitude toward the game of football before we started pushing them toward it. I think that when the liberties of one individual are taken away, it has to be because of the greater good for that person, for society, for the game of football.
Okay. Well, in the meeting that I was just in, I got removed because I made a comment about our nonprofit status and the excessive profits that we're making and we're striving for. And my problem comes with, should you be able to keep your nonprofit status if you're making excessive amounts of profit?
Well, you got to really look into the situation as the two parties. First, for the NFL, yes, you're going to want to keep all these profits. Why? Because you got to think of it. What happens if fans stop liking the NFL and it goes completely downhill? You're going to want a large sum of money to help cushion that blow and help reinvent yourself to get the fans back on your side. But looking at it through other NPOs, they're probably not as happy with the NFL. They probably would like the NFL to not be able to keep all this money. Just because they're America's favorite game does not put them on a different level, and they're going to want to make sure that the government is properly looking into this situation.
Thinking of it in a concept called the veil of ignorance. And what the veil of ignorance is removing certain facts from people. So, for example, I never told you that you could be a very good basketball player. You would never know that. But the NFL does not broadcast its nonprofit status, so the public is behind the veil of ignorance. The fact that they keep their nonprofit status by this method, to me, is completely immoral.
You see, young man, I'm a rule follower. I believe in rules. And the U.S. government has laid off specific guidelines on what a nonprofit can be and what you have to do to qualify as a nonprofit. And as long as you're maintaining those standards and you're maintaining what those guidelines are set before you, then you're definitely allowed to be a nonprofit. So far as what we've seen, the NFL has been following those rules, and that's why they've been able to keep those nonprofit status. Assuming they're not directly harming anybody, you could make the argument that it's okay that nonprofits are making excess amounts of money. Is it ideal? No, but it's not like it can't be done.
I would say no, the NFL should not be considered an NFL or a nonprofit rather, because of the excessive amounts of money that they are bringing in and then keeping for themselves. They are literally not doing enough to combat the violence, to combat the dangers and risks and health risks that are associated with playing the game. When you look at it in the NFL, they need to be allocating their funds in a way that reflects a responsible and consistent image in the community, and they have failed to do that from my perspective, at least.
Well, I guess this kind of leads me into my last question. I mean, the NFL, it makes large sums of money, and they are an NPO. So they do get public funds, or grants, I should even say, I mean, in terms of tax, not paying taxes, and they also have a tendency to have cities or even states allocate them money to build stadiums or to reduce the prices and the costs. And my problem is, a question, should they be limited in having access to public funds when they are a private organization?
Well, this question goes back to the last question too. You got to look at both sides. First, from the team's perspective, or even the NFL, they're going to want as much funds as they can get to help build the stadium and keep the teams where they are. But if you look at the city's perspective, they're going to want what's best for the citizens. And in order to get a team, build a new stadium, or even keep the team, they're probably going to have to raise taxes. Now, the citizens aren't going to like this. But also, think of the business that NFL team could bring in, whether it's local economy business or even tourism for the fans coming in to see the team.
Jonathan, I think you mentioned in your class that you had learned that stadiums actually don't provide a lot of money for the surrounding area. There were some blog posts about that in your professor's class.
You're right.
Well, I want you to take my first and second long contracts and place it in this again. Now, looking at the NFL as an entity and the city as an entity. Now, if the NFL comes in and decides to take from the city that revenue that could be placed into other things, there's no contract, and even if there was, it would not be reciprocated to the city. The amount of good being given back to the city for the amount of good that the NFL gets, it's not equal. And I would argue it's very immoral that the NFL would do this.
I propose that you ask yourself a question. I believe in something called the universal law formulation. So when you're debating about whether something is ethical or not, ask yourself this question. What would happen if everybody dropped what they're doing and they began doing that proposed action? And we go to the situation where you have private organizations using public funds. I mean, once in a while might be okay, but you have to ask yourself, what if every private organization started using public funds? Where would the funding come from? Would there be any funding left over? You might get to the point where there'd be no more private organizations left over. There'd be receiving so much public funding that the idea of a private organization would cease to exist. It almost comes self-defeating. You have to go and you have to ask. You have to go and you have to ask yourself that question in order to have an ethical response.
Using cost-benefit analysis from a utilitarian standpoint, there is just not enough good for the community as a whole to be invested financially in the building of these stadiums. When the NFL uses the money, which is rightfully the taxpayers, rightfully to be used for the society, the taxpayers virtually get nothing in return. They are simply out that money. They don't get anything back. I think that the money used to build these stadiums could very well be used to do other things in the community, things that would better or more greatly impact the life and functionality of society as a whole. And I think that those funds should be used rather than on a football stadium.
Wow, thanks guys. You really helped me clear up a lot of problems that I was having in my head. I really appreciate this all.
We're happy to help you, Jonathan.
You should get back to class.
Now it's time to wake up.
I know what I gotta do.